Are you feeling overwhelmed by the demands of others, struggling to balance your own needs with those of your friends, family, or colleagues? Are you finding it challenging to set healthy boundaries in your relationships? Welcome to the Transformational Peace podcast, and I'm Dr. Lee. In this episode, we will explore the many ways boundaries affect our lives. I will also present some strategies to help you navigate the complexities of boundary setting. And thank you for clicking on this video, and if it provides you with encouragement, please click the subscribe button below. Also, please share this video with someone you feel might find this information helpful. Hello friends, thanks for joining me, and today we'll be discussing mastering boundaries, overcoming people-pleasing, oversharing, and social anxiety. And the first question is, what are boundaries? Boundaries are a way of telling others who we are and how we want to be treated, and they also indicate respect. Think of it like this. It's kind of like playing a game where you have everybody there, let's say Bananagram, which is a really cool game, by the way, because it's like playing Scrabble driving in a car at 90 miles an hour. But you all want to play this game, but nobody knows the rules, so you get together, you pass out all the tiles, and you say, go. Well, nothing happens because we don't know how to interact because we don't know our rules. Hope that helped. So boundaries also demonstrate to others a need for respect for our time, our personal space, our bodies, our mental health, or any number of other things. The big misconception here is that asking others to respect your boundaries is selfish or even rude. Just because we feel uncomfortable doesn't necessarily mean we're being rude. They communicate to others what we need to feel safe, cared for, and respected. A common misstep I see in clinic is when we assume other people know how we want to be treated or what our boundaries are. Big mistake, because we can't read each other's minds in terms of our boundaries. I'll put it this way. It falls under my good intentions with unintended consequences principle. For example, even a close friend who intends well may not know exactly what you need at any given moment. We need to communicate our boundaries to others, and that's just the starting point. So there are basically 7 main types of boundaries that are commonly mentioned. They are physical, sexual, emotional/mental, spiritual, financial/material, time, and non-negotiable boundaries. So I'm not going to discuss all of these now in the interest of time, so we'll cover them more in future videos. So what I will do is discuss a couple of the 7 boundary types of each in terms of common boundary issues, people-pleasing and oversharing, and how they work in terms of boundaries with ourselves and boundaries with others. So before we talk about common boundary issues, I want to underscore briefly the importance of boundaries. When we don't set boundaries or have poor boundaries, stress and anxiety can increase, often leading to depression. The more we strive, overly so, with poor boundaries for the approval of others, the farther away we become from a healthy self-identity or our authentic selves. This can often leave us feeling tense or even angry and resentful towards others. Healthy boundaries are an essential part of maintaining emotional and relational well-being. So now we're going to look at 2 different types of boundary violations people typically experience. And the first is people-pleasing. Yes, your favorite and mine. When we consistently strive to please others, we often sacrifice our own wants or needs in the process. People-pleasers are such nice people, aren't they? Well, actually, people-pleasers aren't. In other words, nice people are nice to themselves and others, but people-pleasers are only nice to other people, but they're not nice to themselves. Yes, there's a difference. They don't respect themselves. And it's like that old adage, if you want to help others, you have to help yourself first. People-pleasers are typically highly empathic individuals who've been emotionally abused or manipulated, and they feel the need to do favors for others. It's so ingrained, it's like they can't help themselves, but they can. They have trouble saying no to basically everyone, which makes them very uncomfortable, so they don't. Hence, they're always available to everyone, and in fact, they tend to put others' needs above their own without hesitation. They just don't understand how to prioritize themselves. They rarely express a differing opinion, even when they clearly disagree. They apologize a lot, simply because they can't tolerate the fact that someone may be upset with them. A major trait of people-pleasers is a lack of identity and a pervasive sense of lack of connection with others. They exhibit a pervasive sense of unhappiness because they can't define what happiness is and consequently don't know how to obtain it. They're always preoccupied with making everyone else around them happy. And here's the kicker. This style of life is adaptive and a learned strategy. And in this case, it's a matter of survival. Yes, we actually developed these traits in childhood because someone taught us that to be accepted and loved, we needed to fear rejection and seek validation through social acceptance. Failure to successfully navigate this milestone in childhood can clearly lead to insecurities and fear of loss or abandonment issues. Again, all because someone told us that if we didn't compromise our boundaries or give in to others, we weren't valuable. So we grow up learning to depend on others for self-affirmation and self-validation. And here's number 2, oversharing. Okay, so I included this one because it's one that people talk about a lot, but it's a little different animal. Oversharing is when you say more than you should in a conversation with another person or a specific situation, either in person, via text message or email or social media. Kind of like the 2 things you can't take back, the speeding arrow and the spoken word. So there are 4 really good reasons why people overshare. And the first is fast-tracking relationships. And this is when we're developing a new relationship, which can be stressful, and oversharing is an attempt to prematurely develop emotional intimacy. In other words, they want to skip the awkward getting to know you phase and immediately begin sharing very personal information. This typically makes the other person feel very uncomfortable. Some examples could be first dates, new coworkers, or mutual friends that often elicit this oversharing. Oversharing is a way to try to rush intimacy with someone you feel like you should be close with. In these instances, it may also be a way to build depth when you're experiencing loneliness. And number 2, personal space false intimacy, or oh gee, it's time to see the hairdresser again. When someone is in your personal space, whether cutting your hair or doing your nails, this can create a false sense of intimacy. We often mistakenly misread and respond to it as if we were a close friend, and we will share very personal details. And number 3, landing out of bounds. Sometimes we struggle to read social cues and misread others' boundaries. As we fail to identify their boundaries, we may often share overly personal information that makes them feel uncomfortable. This is often referred to as a lack of discretion. And the 4th is awkward. Some of us, and I'm not saying who, dislike awkward silence, so much so that we will literally do anything to avoid it, in particular to the point of oversharing. You may have heard of this with the current generation when they observe an embarrassing situation and they'll remark, awkward or awkward turtle. Here's a good example. A friend invites you to a party to be their +1. You're in a group chatting when your friend leaves to go across the room to talk to another group of friends. The conversation in your group fizzles, and suddenly you find yourself talking about a recent fight with an ex-boyfriend. We experience strong emotions when we overshare, which is a very interesting phenomenon. These emotions may include a need for validation or attention, or feeling vulnerable or insecure. These emotional states may arise out of recent personal challenges or a significant life event, possibly traumatic. Oversharing is often used as a coping mechanism to help us understand and deal with these strong emotions. We often overshare because it's the norm growing up in our childhood. In other words, it was modeled for us. If you struggle with social anxiety, which is an intense and persistent fear of being watched and judged by others, you may be prone to oversharing. You can often become so anxious around others that you are prone to rambling. Here are some signs that you may have a tendency to overshare. Do you hate small talk? Do you share a lot of personal stories? We often overshare because we're so uncomfortable with our own feelings that we're not hearing what other people are saying because our anxiety has us so focused on thinking about what to say next. So I want to give you a really good example of how boundaries work before we begin to start using them. Further, I want to show you in this simple example of how you can be calm, courteous, and polite, know what you want in life, and respect yourself and set healthy boundaries. So let's set the scenario and imagine you have a friend that is moving over the weekend and he calls and asks for your help. Having previous plans, you let him know that you won't be able to help out. So he calls you the day before, and here's how the conversation goes. Him: hey bro, I know I asked you before, but we're short a few people and I could really use your help. You: dude, I feel you and I'm so sorry you got caught short-handed. However, as I told you before, I have prior commitments that I'm obligated to. Him: bro, are you sure? I mean, if you could come by for just an hour or two, that would really help out. You: again, I hope you understand that I also have prior commitments and I hope you can respect my need to honor these obligations. Done. A boundary was set, you respected your own personal boundary, and communicated to your friend the same need to respect your personal boundary. So now that you understand what boundary setting looks like, let's look at a few ideas of setting boundaries for ourselves. And by the way, the prior scenario was a great example of setting boundaries with yourself and others. So for the example of self-boundaries, I'm going to use the boundary of time since that's the one most people struggle with, and I'm going to use it in the context of oversharing. So first, start out by deciding what you value most in your week. Let's assume you value time with your friends. Then second, what makes me feel pressured when I'm with my friends? Maybe when you're with them, you feel pressure to overshare by continually sharing every detail of the past few days since you've last seen them. And then ask yourself, what boundaries do I want to put on myself with what I share with my friends? Make a list of things that make you feel good and a list of things that make you feel uncomfortable or anxious, and then choose and commit to the constructive things you want to share. Decide how you want to communicate these boundaries to your friends. And when you hear the word time, think of the time boundary, which was one of the 7 common boundaries. When sharing, ask a question during the conversation. Give the other person time to talk about themselves so you don't overshare. Slow down before you speak. Take a deep breath. Give yourself time to count to 3 and ask yourself if what you say will be interesting to the other person. Think of what your triggers for oversharing are, and when you find one, put it into a time context by asking yourself, where was I and who was I with? What was the time of day? What was I feeling emotionally? Was I anxious? A possibility or theme, for example, here might be that you become anxious and overshare when you meet a new person. And finally, I'll give you some ideas of setting boundaries with others. And for this one, I'm going to use it in the context of people-pleasing. Be assertive, not aggressive with your boundaries. In other words, own and respect your boundaries. If you don't find yourself believable, neither will others. Number 2, don't try to anticipate or predict the other person's feelings or response because, quite frankly, this is an impossibility. Hear them out so that you can consciously understand how they're responding and treating your boundaries. Number 3, notice how consistently you are respecting your own boundaries. Your own personal boundaries are the easiest ones to walk over. Setting boundaries for yourself and keeping them is a matter of discipline, and how well you do that will either be a matter of a reward or a consequence. So I'll give one last example here. Let's imagine I have a boundary issue I'm dealing with a close friend. I have a choice. I can either learn how to deal with the discomfort of a difficult conversation with them and honor the healthy emotional boundaries of the friendship, or I can choose the anxiety of putting it off and waiting to speak to them. And to extend this scenario, if you recall from earlier, people pleasers fear rejection of loss of relationships. So naturally, they worry when they set boundaries that they will lose friends and consequently have fewer friends. But in reality, maybe those people were never your friends in the first place. And number 4, one final thought. Boundaries are not only about giving other people the choice to interact with you, but how they interact with you. And remember, sometimes life is like throwing a party. You invite people. Some leave early, some leave late, but the ones who stay and help you clean up are the ones that matter and are your true friends. I'm Dr. Lee.